All right, we are here. So, do you guys know that Rivian is a sponsor here? Have you guys seen them around? That is the coolest thing. I've been to so many South Bys and I've never seen anything like this.
A pile of dirt.
It's really cool.
Yeah, it's really fun. I was out there today, and the excitement of being in a car going a half mile per hour at a 35-degree angle is really fun.
Did anyone do the adventure in the pile of dirt? Okay, we've got a couple. If you haven't, I highly suggest doing it because I actually do have an R1T and I've never done anything as wild as that.
Yeah,
it was really cool.
Now you're ready.
I'm ready.
I'm trained.
So for you,
actually, Justine says to me, "How do I do this?" And one of the drivers goes, "Well, you have to be level 2 driver trained." She says, "Well, how do I get level 2 driver trained?"
I was like, "Can we do that now?" And then he told me that he's level 5, and I was like, "Well, I don't want to be level 2 anymore. We need to go to 5." Is there anything after 5?
Well, that's it.
Okay, that's all we need. So for you, kind of like coming into this, Rivian is, I don't want to speak for you, but I feel like this is your passion project. Like this is something that you have pretty much dreamed of as a kid. Yeah. And for anyone that doesn't know about Rivian, just give us kind of like a little brief overview of how it came to be and sort of your role in all of this.
Yeah, so I started the company in 2009. So it feels like it was simultaneously just yesterday, and also feels like it was about 15 years ago. But prior to that, I actually realized I wanted to start this company and realized I wanted to really do something to help contribute to helping to shift how we think about transportation and the transition towards more sustainable transportation, personal mobility. And I grew up a huge car enthusiast, worked on cars, restored classic cars. And as I got older, I realized these things that I loved so much were the root of so many of our challenges. Everything from local air quality to some of the global disputes that we're in to, of course, climate. And that led me to say, well, I want to work on that as a problem, and went to school and studied. And I remember telling my dad, I want to start a car company. And now as a parent, what I really appreciate is my dad was like, yeah, that's totally a great idea. You should do it. And I try to use that in my mind when my kids tell me crazy ideas now, because it was great to have his support so early on.
And I think that's so powerful too, because I feel like as you're creating Rivian, there's no way that everyone was like, yeah, this is a great idea, you should do that. But having that one person kind of just in your ear and in your corner really kind of made all of this happen for you.
Yeah. In fact, before I started the company, I was in grad school, and I was really hesitant to even talk about it. And in fact, like my lab partner, my PhD advisor, I didn't even tell them I was starting a car company. So the day after I graduated, I said, I'm starting a car company. And they said, well, why didn't you tell us? And I said, well, I was so nervous. I knew you guys understand how hard it would be, and you would try to talk me out of it and tell me it was a really bad idea. And my PhD advisor looks at me and says, it is a really bad idea.
Have you talked to him since?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
just
over the years, he's sent me notes and said, yeah, it doesn't look like it's going so well. You should think about something else. And then sometimes, hey, it looks like it's going much better. So it's been fun.
Well, it's kind of fun to follow along that journey. And I feel like everyone here has probably had that happen to them in their lives, had this passion, had this goal. And I feel like you've made it happen. So had you gone back and done this all again, coming out of college, what do you wish that you knew then that you could have told your younger self? Or did it all work out how it should have?
Well, it's funny, at the time, there's all these mistakes you make along the way. So to start something like a car company, you need a lot of hard to come by things. You need them all at the same time. So you need billions of dollars of capital. You need a team of thousands of engineers, supply chain that's going to build thousands of parts made up of hundreds of companies providing the parts, things like seats and headlamps and tires. You need a plant that's ginormous, 4 or 5 million square foot facility. You need a brand that people are going to care about and will follow, and you need a product that actually generates interest. And in the beginning, you have none of those things. And the hardest element is you need capital to develop any of those things. And so you can imagine how these early investor meetings would go. You'd go in and you'd say, well, I'm starting a car company, and the person's on the verge of rolling their eyes, says, okay, tell me about it. And you say, well, I haven't quite figured out the product yet. And they say, well, what's the technology? Well, we don't have any technology yet. Well, you must have a great team. Well, so far it's me, and there's 3 guys, but they're about to finish college. They're just wrapping up. Well, do you have supplier partners? Well, not yet. And so you go through and you can sort of see very clearly, wow, the likelihood of success is very low, and this person thinks the likelihood of success is true zero. And you have to find little like cracks to find ways to create momentum and start to build some, some capital to do some development of the idea, and then slowly we started to get enough momentum to then start doing real development and hiring much larger teams. And but it does seem like 2 days ago that we could all fit the whole company, all 5 of us, into one room, and now we have well over 15,000 employees. So it's a lot has changed.
So there was a video that I watched of like the robotics and your entire manufacturing facility. It was the wildest thing. Like you guys have to go check this video out. So I mean, coming from that to that, who do you kind of owe a lot of this to? Who kind of gave you that first start? Who finally gave you that first yes?
There was the first investment. So the first capital was actually my own. I owned a house and I refinanced the house, which wasn't a very big house, so it wasn't a lot of money coming in, but it was enough to do like some very, very early things. And then the first outside capital was actually the person who owned the restoration shop, the Porsche restoration shop that I used to work in as a kid. And so ironically, he was the person that taught me how to rebuild carburetors. And that's ironic, of course, because I'm building an electric car company. But he said, look, I'm going to invest, and I know him really well. And I said, I've pitched a lot of people, and none of them have gone well. Sitting here today, you're going to be the first outside money in. Tell me why you're going to do it. And he looked at me and he's like, RJ, I've known you for a long time, and I'm investing in you. And he's like, whatever you think you're going to do now is probably going to change. It's pivot, it'll twist, it'll turn, it'll evolve. But I really believe in you. And I was like, oh, yeah, that really took me back. And he actually hasn't sold a single share. He's been in since 15 years.
Wow.
So he's been enormously helpful. And then from that point forward, then it made it a lot easier to raise other sources of capital.
That's amazing. I actually didn't know that. So that's really cool to kind of
He owns Rivian as well.
What's that?
Of course. He said he owns a Rivian as well.
Which one does he have? Do you know?
It's like number 10. It's an early one.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's such a fun story, and something that I love and that sold me on Rivian was the culture. So I went to the grand opening of your Laguna space, which all of the spaces that you guys open are just so awesome, and the way that you kept so much of the history, it just really said so much to the community, and I think it was so awesome to see. But that culture was what sold me. So how is that for you, kind of creating that culture and making sure that that kind of carries through to the brand?
Well, culture and brand are both, they're really hard to build deterministically, meaning it's not like you take 6 ingredients, put them together, and voila, here comes exactly the culture you're aiming for, exactly the brand you're aiming for. Much more complex and far more nuanced. And in order to end up in a state that's close to what you're aspiring to, it requires really deep commitment to what your beliefs are. At least this is how I believe it to be. And so we spend a lot of time really thinking hard about what are the things that are important to us as a company, and what are the non-negotiables, so to speak, in terms of how we manifest as a company, how we manifest as an employer. And we spent a lot of time debating that, but one of the words that came out as we worked through this that was really important to us was this idea of building a company and a brand that's highly inviting. And I mean that in the broadest sense, inviting to lots of different perspectives from a product development point of view, inviting from lots of different backgrounds and cultures in terms of how we staff our organization, but importantly inviting for our customers to come from different backgrounds, but also inviting them to experience an adventurous and active life, and helping to enable that through the products, through the inspiration that the brand can help drive. And so as you go to our spaces, there's a tremendous amount of intentional decisions. And, I say this all the time. When you look in this room, nothing in this room is an accident. These are all decisions someone took. Now, we may not agree with every one of them, but they're all decisions. And so when we look at our spaces, when we look at our products, we try really hard to make the decisions, the many, many decisions that were being taken, make them consistently. And so everything from the finishing of the floor to the use of reused furniture to the colors, these are all things that are trying to come together to create that feeling we feel comfortable. And we often say, You can walk into one of our facilities in dress shoes or barefoot, and you feel equally comfortable either way. And we do the same in the car. But that takes practice, takes iteration. We don't always get it right. On the product side, it was much harder to land on that. We had to iterate through a lot of different versions. Some of our design teams here will know that we spent so much time debating carpet in the car. I was really against it. We ended up having it. But it was one of those areas where we said, could we create a floor surface that makes you feel more comfortable getting in the car after being at the beach? We ultimately landed on carpet and a different type of floor mat, but it's those questions that drive the right discussions that then drive other features and drive the teams to innovate in really creative ways.
Maybe you can use this carpet as your next inspiration.
Yeah, maybe.
Possibly.
This is probably it.
We'll think about it. Be like, oh yeah, that was back on the Hilton at South by.
The Hilton version.
The Hilton version. You never know.
Yeah.
Anything is possible.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's fun is like collaborations and stuff like that. I feel like you guys are very open to that. And something else that I'm not like super proud to admit, but I also have a Cybertruck. I know. So, the gasps in the audience, I'm so sorry. No, you guys are also partners with Tesla. I think opening up, being able to charge my Rivian at a Tesla has been so incredible. I mean, what's it like for you kind of, it's a whole different landscape, Tesla, Rivian, but I know, I don't even know how to ask this question because it's a tough one, but like,
no, it's a good question.
How do you feel about the whole landscape of things?
Yeah. Well, we're at a really interesting moment in time. And if you were to look at what's happening from an overall automotive, transportation, energy point of view, we as a planet have evolved over the last, call it 110, 120 years to an industrial system that's very reliant on fossil fuels. So effectively, the world that we know today, the light in the rooms, the conditioned air, the fact that these chairs are made not here, we have a global international movement of people, goods, services. I can get strawberries in the winter, all these things that are very, very unique to essentially the way we live and the way our parents' have experienced, starting that far back. But if you go back any further than that, life was very different. And all that was built through us accessing fossil fuels and this massive industrial revolution that kicked off the end of the 1800s. And here we are today, and we're really at this inflection point where we're going to see this whole global energy ecosystem get completely remapped to something that's running on carbon-free energy, so energy without fossil fuels. And that's going to be renewables of various types and some element of nuclear power. And we're going to see that get built out over the course of the next several decades. And it's sort of floors you when you realize that in the history of humanity, there was this blip in time where we rapidly industrialized, we rapidly developed technologies. Our way of life that had existed for thousands of years suddenly changed. And it was facilitated by something that we're responsible as a generation to effectively wind off of. And so to do that, there's lots of changes that have to come. And some of the biggest are within the transportation space. Transportation, of course, is using liquid fuels. There's 1.5 billion cars on the planet today. Those 1.5 billion cars consume about 1,000 barrels of oil every second, which is pretty mind-blowing, just the scale of it. But we need lots of companies that are working on developing products that are really exciting. And so to your question, when we look at Tesla or we look at other manufacturers, I think it's incredibly important that we have lots of choice. So we need Rivian to be successful, we need Tesla to be successful, we need other manufacturers to be successful. And I think in this moment in time, at this critical inflection point where we're witnessing, you can imagine 1,000 years from now, the history books being written of the end of the fossil fuel era. And we're alive during that amazingly. And I mean, how lucky are we? It's such a cool moment. But there's going to be lots of tension because existing businesses have to change. Incumbent industries are going to get shifted into new industries. It's going to drive, as we're witnessing, political tension. And I think it's important we recognize that collectively we as a society need to actually come together. And there's going to be more than multiple winners in this. Tesla needs to win. We need to win. As you pointed out, we now work with them on leveraging their charging network, and we've also opened up our charging network. But also politically, there was a great talk Hannah from our team hosted earlier today that had a governor of South Carolina and the governor of Illinois coming together, and to see a Republican and a Democrat talk in such a beautiful way. And of course, Hannah helped pull that conversation together, but to see the nature of how there's so many more similarities than there are differences in terms of needing to create an environment where we're protecting both our environment, building our businesses, and of course driving education. It was really, it was sort of like, that's great to see. I said to Han after, I wish everybody could see this. But that's this moment in time that we're in. And so we try as a brand very hard to show up in a way that avoids polarization, that avoids driving folks apart, and actually tries to pull folks together.
Now, is there something specific that you want to see from these companies that are kind of leading this charge into the EV era?
Well, I think we need choice. So today we're at about 8% of new vehicle sales are electric. And that's great, it's progress. But that means there's 92% of new vehicle sales that aren't electric. And we're, as a country, we're quite behind the rest of the world. So China's around 40%, Europe's, depending on the country, between 15 and 20%. But a big driver of that is we need choices. And so if you're a consumer that's thinking about buying a car and you want to spend less than $50,000, there's just not that many great options, great electric options. Of course, you have Tesla with Model 3, Model Y. But if that doesn't fit your form factor, your design preferences, your brand preferences, we need lots of other things. And so we're about to launch our much lower price product, which we call R2. It's super cool. I'm really, really excited about it. It's, there's one, at our space, for anybody that's here that hasn't been down there, we have an R2 at our space. We also have its sibling product, a follow-up product, which is R3, which is even lower priced.
It's really cool.
It's epic. I can't wait. But I often say the R2 will be the best thing we've ever developed, which should be the case because we've learned a lot with R1, but it takes the magic of the aspiration and the excitement that we see in R1, and it doesn't lose any of that, but it marries that with like tons of innovation around cost and manufacturing efficiency. And I wish it was in the market today, but in about a year, we'll have it out there.
Do you have a date, or is that something that'll be coming soon that we can?
Well, the comms team would kill me if I gave a date.
Okay,
but,
okay. Look, I'm just trying to help you guys out there.
About a year, yeah.
So now you're talking about other companies kind of doing this. To any aspiring car maker, manufacturers that may be out there, do you have any tips for them on kind of getting into this industry and kind of being where you are? They may be a 13-year-old out there that's like, I want to be like RJ when I grow up. Yeah. And that is possible.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think I actually had coffee over the weekend with an entrepreneur who's just starting a business, and I love that stage. Some of my favorite memories of Rivian are in those early days when you don't have a large team in place, so you can be really fluid with what the business is and what the product is. You're learning at such a fast rate. You're making mistakes, but the cost of those mistakes is not that high. So it's a wonderful time. And I think one of the things that's really important is to embrace the difficulty. So in the moment, like classic, quote unquote type 2 fun, in the moment, you're like, boy, this is hard. I wish we could raise capital. I wish we hadn't had that investor reject us. I wish we had solved this technical problem faster. But all those hard moments, all those cuts you accumulate, really form you as an entrepreneur and help inform what the business becomes. And I wouldn't trade any of the difficulties that I experienced for the first handful of years that were like really painful moments for anything. And I think, if anything, I wish I could go back and tell myself, like, really enjoy this. Later on, you'll appreciate just how hard this is. But that's part of the journey. That's part of the journey of building a business.
And there's no way you would have listened to yourself at that time at all. You're like, yeah, sure, future RJ.
It's something like that, yeah.
So now you talk a lot about our kids, and that kind of shows through on a lot of the stuff that you guys are doing in trying to eliminate fossil fuels and bring this all into fruition. So where did you come up with kind of that saying, and how was that kind of shown throughout? Well,
one of the things in building a business, and especially a business that has a complex product, that you realize is you have to make a lot of decisions. And so I don't know the exact number, but we've estimated in the development of a vehicle, there's on the order of 50 to 100 million decisions that get made. So everything from the length of the threads in the carpet to the color of the door handles to the materials used in the chassis to the many, many lines of software that are written. So there's just countless decisions. And in the beginning, when I first started the company, every single decision is made by me. by definition, because there's no other employees. And then we hire someone, and maybe the decisions get split 50-50. But as the company scales, it becomes really clear that the challenge of running a scaled business that's developing innovative products that are doing things often for the first time is enabling highly distributed but coordinated decision making. And in certain technical areas, you can sort of drive those decisions practically to say, we're taking this technical approach, everybody work towards that. But we wanted like a higher level philosophy that informed how we took decisions, and importantly, how we took big strategic decisions. And it sounds so simple, but we ended up coming up with this point of clarity to say, well, let's make decisions as a company, reflecting them through the perspective of our kids, which is an elegant way of saying we're going to take long-term view on our decisions, and we're going to make decisions that work towards creating a better world for the generations to come. And so there's lots of, the easy decisions are easy. It's the hard decisions that require these sorts of things. So imagine we have to decide in the interior if we're going to use a foam that costs half as much as a renewable organic foam. And in that realm, you could say, well, of course, go with the renewable organic foam. But if you took that decision on every single part and every element of the vehicle may cost more than customers are willing to pay. And so you have to really be careful on how you puzzle all these things together. And so then we have a whole cadence of reviews, but that framework helps us make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, it kind of really takes it into a whole new perspective
Yeah.
of like, well, what if our kids? I mean, it's such a
Yeah.
great
Yeah.
thought process, and I feel like that's probably helped you come to a lot of decisions.
Well, what's amazing is it was something we talked about internally, and then we started using this externally as well. And now I think it's really true, where as a society, there's very few things I think that are completely consistent across many cultures, many countries, many political ideologies. But one that's very clearly consistent is that we love our kids. It's a basic human characteristic. And because of that, it's this unifying basic characteristic that we may disagree wildly on the tactics, but let's just first, before we have an argument, let's agree that we're actually working towards the same end goal, which is to create a better world for our kids and their kids. And boy, does that take the hot air out of the room. And you know, if it's a tense political discussion with friends, it's like helpful. If it's a hard negotiation, it's just a helpful way to look at the world. And you know, it's something we think about very, very often.
Now, you also have kids. So what is it like for them kind of growing up in this all-electric world? Because a lot of kids today, I mean, they don't know what it's like to have the things that we had before, and we don't really think about that. So what's it kind of like for them being like, we only know electric cars?
Yeah, there's so many things about being a kid right now that, it's fun to extrapolate, imagining how they'll interpret the world when they're our age. So I have a 9-year-old, a 7, and a 6-year-old, 3 boys, and they didn't grow up in a world where there was regular phones. They've grown up completely around electric cars, and so their perspectives may be in extreme because of just their proximity to me. But my middle son, who's super inquisitive and loves to ask these really great questions, said to me the other day, he said, "Dad, why are there still so many gas cars being sold?" And I said, "Well, Max, it's going to take us some time as a society to build enough variety and to create all the different types of vehicles that people want, and to get the price to levels and solve charging." And I'm describing to him, he says, "Well, Dad, why don't you just make more cars at Rivian?" And I said, "Well, it's really hard." And he says, "But can't you try harder?" And I was like, oh, damn. It's like, got me.
Put him on the payroll.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And I think sometimes it does take that childhood perspective.
Oh, I love it. It's
Which, yeah.
Okay, yeah, good point. Yeah.
Like, all right, you start work on Monday,
Yeah.
so let's go.
R4, here we come.
Oh, wow. No, it's amazing to even just think the way that they think. And I think even for you, was there a moment when you realized, because you love these combustion cars so much, that because it was harming the environment, was there a moment that you can recall, when that was, that you decided, maybe I have to make an electric car?
Well, when I was in my teens, I started to really realize some of the things were happening. And I read IPCC2, so the second big report on climate change, and I was like, "Ooh, wow, that's scary." And
childhood reading, as one does.
yeah, good, easy read. And then just started to go really deep on it, and then fell into this moment in life where I was like, "All right, that's it. I can't be involved with cars, and I'm gonna have to work on something else." And it was like a couple of years of me having that sort of thinking that I realized actually the opposite is true, which is I'm passionate about these things, and rather than thinking of them as part of the problem, let's think about how they can be part of the solution. And then I went through this whole journey of like thinking about pedal-powered cars and like a zero carbon car from the get-go, and all these really sort of interesting academic experiments. And it led me to the realization that in order to have impact at scale, the products need to be more than just sustainable or clean or efficient. They need to be incredibly desirable. And it was for that reason that when we launched Rivian and the brand flagship products, what we call the R1 products, they're incredibly high performance. They're sort of unnecessarily high performance. So our quad motor vehicle accelerates 0 to 60 miles per hour in just under 2.5 seconds. It does the quarter mile in like 10.5 seconds. Just to put that to scale, like the fastest Porsche 911 is 10.9 seconds in the quarter mile. So faster than the fastest Porsche 911. And this is a pickup truck. So it's so over the top. But that's the point. It gets people excited and interested. And in addition to being quick, it's incredible off-road, as we showed with our nice pile of dirt around the corner. And then you can also use it every day, as you know very well. And so we wanted to create something that shocked the system in terms of its capability in a space that has historically been relatively reserved, the pickup and SUV space. And then use that to build the brand, and then, of course, launch a series of products underneath that at lower price points and much larger addressable markets.
I mean, I love it so much, and like I've told this story before, but I literally bought my Rivian at the event, the Laguna. That was the first Rivian event I'd ever gone to, and after talking to all of the people, meeting the employees, I was like, I have to be a part of this. And so one of the guys there, Rivian Dad, huge shout out to him, he has a YouTube channel, he helped me spec out my Rivian, we picked it out, and then I was able to pick it up because it was in inventory 4 days later.
I love it.
And like, it's such a fun thing because it was like, I truly saw the passion and how much people loved their vehicles and loved like the connection and the freedom that it gave them to go out and do things.
Totally.
And so I think that's like the core value of what it is to own a Rivian too.
Our Laguna space, the cards are stacked in our favor. It's this beautiful historic theater, one of the oldest structures in Laguna Beach. And it's right on the beach, and we restored it. It's a single theater. And so we had an event, and of course there's beautiful content there. There's nice cars there, so.
But it was honestly just talking to the people. I don't think the space would have mattered.
Really?
Yeah, it was honestly just the vibe. But the space was also really cool.
Yeah.
So.
No, I mean, it's wonderful to hear that. I get all kinds of feedback on our teams, and even when things go wrong, I got an email this morning that said, I'm so frustrated because this, and this happened. But then I talked to, and he named the person, and everything's okay. How do you train your team to be this engaging? And I was like, so I sent that person a note and said, great job.
That's awesome.
But it's amazing, and I think that gets back to your question on culture, is when an organization starts to behave in a certain way and there's norms around how do we interact with people and a level of engagement and excitement and respect that percolates through the business.
Well, it goes back to your first investor. He was investing in you because he knew that you were passionate and you were going to create something, whether it was this or something else. And I think starting that culture from the top up and really living that what you want to see is so powerful. So great job. It's awesome.
Yeah, thanks.
So now moving on to like AI and autonomous driving. I mean, that's something that I love. Like, I just want to be able to, have my car drive me while I'm like eating a sandwich or just doing whatever. How far off are we from that with Rivian?
So this is, we talked about the big shift of imagining the complete remapping of our society and the way our world works towards, away from fossil fuel and towards sustainable energy. In that alone is a huge shift, and I used to believe just how incredibly lucky, I just couldn't believe how incredibly lucky I was to be alive in that transition. But as if that wasn't enough, as if we weren't all lucky enough to be alive to see that happen, we have what I think is actually arguably a bigger shift from a societal point of view, which is we're truly witnessing the birth of artificial intelligence. And we are in the early part of the first inning of this new technology emerging. And so it really came into much clearer focus for the broader general public through large language models. So things like GPT-4, so we can now write book reports a lot easier, we can write emails a lot easier, but we saw just the power of artificial intelligence applied to written words. We're now seeing it in video, we're seeing it in images. What's next to come, which is just, I'd say, even bigger, and in some ways, even harder to imagine, not in the science fiction way, of course we can imagine robotics and cars driving themselves, but from a societal point of view, what this is going to do. What this is going to do when we can have robotics take care of a lot of the manufacturing needs we have on the planet, when we can have vehicles driving themselves. So I'm just calling out, again, just how lucky are we that we get to be alive and part of this massive transformation. But in that vein, we launched our Generation 2 vehicles, we call Gen 2 vehicles, and it's a complete reset to the hardware stack in the vehicle. So, yeah, all right. So we have 55 megapixels of cameras. We have 240 tops, so much higher level of compute on the inference platform, so about 10x what the Gen 1 vehicle is. Sorry.
It's okay.
Really great radars around the periphery of the vehicle, but essentially, an incredible perception stack to see the world, a really smart brain, and the brain we're training with an offline model. So offline from the vehicle, we take lots of data, and we're training this really large parameter foundation model, similar in a way to what we've built with foundation models for language. And that large parameter model gets distilled back down into the vehicle to enable the vehicle to drive itself. But we're in the early days. So actually just this morning, we launched a hands-free mode, which on the highway you can now cruise, but take your hands off the wheel, the vehicle drive itself, so you can eat.
That's great. Can't wait.
But even with that feature set as it is today, in fact, previous to today, it was hands on the wheel, eyes on the road. 20% of the miles driven in Rivians are driven autonomously, which is remarkable because the capabilities of the system are still relatively early. And so it's not going to be long before we go from 20% of the miles where the vehicle's driving itself to 60, 70, 80% of the miles where the vehicle's driving itself. And so for us, that roadmap is, we took the hands off the wheel today on the highway. By the end of the year, we're going to be doing much more turn-to-turn, so you can get in the vehicle, it can go from your house to a location. We then start to take not just hands off the wheel, but eyes off the road in certain situations, particularly highway. And then from there, we grow into more roads, and essentially, what we see as the end state is you can choose to drive the vehicle, or the vehicle can drive itself, but you get time back. And that's all happening in the next few years. And it's the kind of thing we've talked about as an industry, I've thought about for many, many years, but it's actually happening. And the advent of modern approaches to neural nets and transformers and the way we develop AI has changed so much in the last 3 or 4 years that it's really accelerating what we see in embodied AI, so AI in the physical world.
So that's AI kind of like in the cars helping us drive, but how is this helping you kind of in the manufacturing process? Like I said, that video that I saw of the robotics that you guys are using, maybe talk us through that since many people may have not seen that yet.
Yeah, so let's talk about, I'd say first, before we even get to robotics, if you think about how businesses run, in the last 20 years, one of the big developments was the use of large databases to drive better decisions. And off the back of that, we saw platforms like AWS emerge and become really large businesses. And we saw a whole new field of data science emerge. In that, all that work that we're doing to remap our businesses to make them run more efficiently, that represents a tiny fraction of the potential of what AI can actually do. And as we see AI start to move across our businesses, this isn't going to happen overnight. This isn't like it's happening tomorrow. But it is happening, and it's happening in real ways that allow us to run our business and other businesses more efficiently. So it's finding ways to make much better decisions through aggregating much larger pools of data. So an example of that is diagnostics in the vehicle. So historically, if you imagine how you diagnose issues in a vehicle, let's say 5 years ago, vehicle breaks down, you go to a service location, a technician looks at it and assesses what's wrong. Now most of that diagnosis is happening with us, where we're using AI to diagnose what's happening. And you can imagine in the very near future, the vehicle diagnoses an issue or predicts an issue might happen without even telling you, but of course with your permission beforehand, schedules a service action Service happens without you having to be involved at all. Parts are ordered behind the scenes, service technicians scheduled. And so you just start to see these really nice, efficient ways to run the business start to emerge. And the environment where this is going to have the most immediate and large impact is in manufacturing. And so in manufacturing, today, we have lots of robots. We have about 1,500 robots in our plant, but they're not intelligent robots. So they look really cool. They're 6-axis robots. They're moving all over the place, but they're programmed by a human, and they're programmed to have very specific and discrete motions. So it's a 6-axis. You're moving, like an arm or a hand or a hand-like thing to perform a specific task, and it's fixed. What is going to happen is those robots will start to become much more intelligent. So the speed at which you can train them to do a task will be much shorter, and then the ability for them to evolve into doing different tasks will grow. And increasingly, the ability of them to do things that humans do will start to emerge. So shouldn't be too surprising, but where we use it also is we use lots of cameras. So if you go into one of our plant, we have a system we call Petra AI. We needed to name it. But it's a system of thousands of cameras throughout the manufacturing plant that are looking down at the plant floor, and we track quality. We look at industrial engineering, so we look at efficiency. We look at routing for logistics. And it does all this automatically, and it trains itself very quickly, so it observes an area and learns the area, then starts to make recommendations. So these are just like the beginnings of how AI is going to really change the way we run our businesses, and I just can't wait as I think about what the future looks like as we drive more efficiency. It allows us to produce vehicles and products at a lower price, but it is going to be very different looking businesses across the world.
It's amazing kind of to see where you guys have started just a year ago. The last time that we talked was about a year ago, and you guys have had a wild year. I mean, you've had your partnership with Volkswagen, you've released some new vehicles. So maybe you kind of just talk us through, before we get to some questions, kind of what this last year has been for Rivian.
Yes, it was almost exactly a year ago where we unveiled R2, R3, and R3X. And you and I talked at that event, which was great. Since then, a number of big things have happened. Of course, we did a large deal, as you said, with Volkswagen. So we signed what's one of the largest software licensing deals in the history of the automotive industry. It was a $5.8 billion deal where we provide software and the core electronics for what we call the zonal controllers, but essentially a concentrated set of compute platforms placed around the vehicle to underpin a whole host of vehicles across the Volkswagen Group. So the Volkswagen Group, that's Porsche, Audi, Bentley, Lamborghini. There's a wide array of brands. And aside from it being a great deal for us as a business, where we were able to leverage and utilize this technology stack that we built, it is so smack on bullseye for our mission we talked about this at the start, of wanting to help drive the auto industry towards having more selection, more products for consumers. And the opportunity to help the second largest car manufacturer in the world, Volkswagen Group, bring amazingly compelling products into market is it's super motivating to our teams, and it's super fulfilling to see something that we worked on for so long, and by the way, something that many people thought was a bad idea. You can imagine in 2017, 2018, me going to our investors and saying, we're going to develop everything in-house. We're going to do our own computers, we're going to build our own software, we're going to build our own battery packs. Everything's vertically integrated, and it takes, the price tag for that is many billions of dollars. But I was really convicted that we needed to do it. And I remember saying this in a board meeting. I said, if we do this really well, I'm sure we'll be able to license some of this to existing manufacturers. And I remember one of the board members was like, that'll never happen, but fine, if you really want to do this, that kind of thing.
Right.
And here we are, and we did a giant $5.8 billion deal on that. Yeah,
I mean, you guys have not only created cars, but you're now a software company. So how was that kind of like transitioning and realizing that you had to sort of be both?
Yeah, I mean, if you're building a car company from scratch, and you're doing it in this time horizon, in this time period, native capabilities around software and electronics is so core to being successful. I think it's one of the most important skill sets. That's not to say the mechanical aspects of the car aren't really important as well, but building up that deep domain expertise and thinking, behaving, acting like a software company, and or an electronics company or both, is really important. And so it's hard to fabricate that. And there's lots of large established companies that are now trying to build that in. And they have a hard task because they have layers of management and years of experience doing something a certain way. And one of the hallmarks of a software mindset is continuous improvement. And we think of it something like this: people that are in tech, you'd say an OTA, an over-the-air update.
Right.
And it's a very foreign concept. It's for someone from tech, it may seem crazy that it's a foreign concept, but if you're in automotive, when you ship the product, it's done. Whereas in electronics, you ship the product and it's the beginning of a ongoing cascade of improved and enhanced software features. And what we found is customers enjoy the enhancements as much as the product. And they like the feedback loop. They like being able to say, hey, I wish you could add this feature, and that somehow gets to our software team, and the software team then makes the decision to add that feature. But I think this is the way that we're going to see products continue to develop, these technically advanced products that are highly dynamic, continuing to get better with time. And that's just so different than traditional automotive, and many large industrial businesses just don't think in that way.
I mean, it really is the coolest thing that my truck is completely different than it was a year ago.
Yeah.
There's so many fun updates, and even the things you guys do during the holidays, like Halloween, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
So I think we're about to get to some audience questions. So I think that those were going to be somewhere for us. Oh, okay, here they are. All right. Do you want to choose one here? Let's see. Of the 100 million decisions you've made, what were the 3 most key decisions when defining your brand?
Maybe 100 million. Not me, but the team. Well, I'll speak about a major pivot. And I think when you are building a business, especially from the ground up, there's this fine balance of being really convicted around what you're building, but also recognizing that the idea probably needs to evolve or change. And I think that the best entrepreneurs are the ones that are really clear on what the vision is, but really flexible on the tactics to achieve it. And so that's easy to say. In practice, it's much harder. So for us, when I first started, we were actually building a sports car. And the idea was build the sports car, use that to launch the brand, use that as a brand platform, and then add other products on top of it. We spent a couple of years working on that, built the prototype, and what seemed like pouring our heart and soul into this thing, working around the clock for 2 years. And it seemed like it'd be impossible to walk away from that. But while that was happening, I had this deep feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. And we had on the wall at the company, we're building this company because it does not exist. And the thing that wasn't right was the strategy we were following was not by design or not by intention, but by coincidence, was very similar to Tesla. Tesla launched, of course, with a sports car, what they called the Roadster. And they were already in market with that product. And so we made the decision to shelve that product, to stop and to reset. And that sounds like, okay, that's a big decision. What made it really hard, it wasn't like we turned off the sports car effort and immediately pulled out, all right, here's the next plan. We turned off the sports car and said, now we have to really figure out what we're going to do. So it was like we were on a trail, we knew it was the wrong trail, but we turned into the woods and said, well, there's no trail here, but we have to figure out what it looks like. And we then spent a lot of time asking the question of why does Rivian exist? And what's its purpose? And we arrived through many iterations at what you see today. But if we hadn't taken that one decision to shelve things, we wouldn't be sitting here today. I really believe this. A company wouldn't have been successful. We wouldn't have been able to raise capital. And so there are times in building a business where you have really hard decisions, maybe even really unpopular decisions. This was one of those. No one at the company agreed with me. And this investor, this guy I told you about a moment ago, really disagreed with me.
You wanted a sports car.
He really disagreed with me. So it was a very lonely decision. But I was so convicted that it was the right thing to do. And of course, I'm glad we did it. And I think for founders or for entrepreneurs or builders, being really crisp in your thinking around what's your core vision, and being understanding that you may have to be flexible in the execution of that, I think is important. And you need to trust your gut, trust your judgment.
Well, I think you really hit on, this is a vehicle that you would want for adventures, and I think you really targeted kind of a market that was sort of left out because it was all just cars and it was all just a sports car. So I guess kind of going through that process, was that something that you're like, I'm going to make a vehicle that I would want to drive for my adventures?
Well, I definitely wanted to drive it, but yeah, I was sort of fortunate that I love to be outdoors. I'm big into active sports and things like that, so it sort of worked. But there was also a strategy to realize that if we can build a product that enables and inspires people to be outdoors, it's going to help link people to wanting to be active participants in sustainability as well.
So I like this question. So how do you see the role of universities in transitioning how we move, think, and change the planet? So I guess kind of relying more on universities and teaching and learning and helping people, I guess, prepare for creating this new world.
I just had a deep discussion on this over the weekend. I was with a couple of academics, and we were talking about the challenge we have today of so much of our society being divided on topics, and how do we create a consistent and clear voice in and around the noise. And I think one of the things that universities have historically provided, and especially in times of big change or big inflection points, and they can provide an unbiased, honest view of situations. So whether that be climate or grid stability as we electrify, or battery sourcing. And so I think universities are places that by design are intended to teach, by design they're intended to inspire curiosity, but I think they can also help form points of aggregation to have ideas come together, to have thought leaders come together. And I said this to some folks in senior positions at very well-known schools, that I don't think they're doing enough right now. I think they're far too silent in not being, I'm not saying be political, but I'm saying have a stronger voice to be in the discussion. I think universities have faded more than they should have.
I think it's hard because I do feel like a lot of universities do lag behind, no matter what it is. Like even growing up, I was like, this doesn't have, there's nothing that I want to do here. And so I think it is a whole catch-up. All right, we've got a couple more questions here. Let's see, we've got, when I see a Rivian, I'm excited to drive one, not only ride in one. How do you see Rivian evolving in the autonomous landscape? I know we did talk about that a little bit. Was there anything else you wanted to add about autonomous vehicles, or kind of like in the future? Like, how do you see Rivian in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I think there's a spectrum. So, here in Austin, we have Waymos running around, which is great to see, and that's a pure ride service. So there's no chance you'll get to ever drive a Waymo. But in a personally owned vehicle, often you find yourself not wanting to drive. If you're on the highway, if you're in a commute, if you're in a conversation, if you're eating a taco, you may want to remove yourself from the responsibility of driving. And this is an area where I think it's really exciting, because you can develop these level 3 features where you can go hands off, eyes off, that the vehicle can still have certain areas where it may need you to drive it, but for 80–90% of the roads we can cover with self-driving, and that'll be here soon. So I think the ability to decide when you want to drive or not drive is a really important aspect of that.
I would say most of the time I don't want to. So I like that. I like this question as well. It says, if you were to describe Rivian in 3 words, what would they be? I mean, you can do 4, like it's fine. I won't tell. It's fine. See what you can do.
Let's see.
Or 2. Short form.
I'd say inviting, adventurous, and empathetic.
And how do you see kind of empathy kind of tying into this all?
I think empathy is part of being inviting. I mean, one of the reasons I think that electrification has become a more political topic than I would have ever thought it would have become is that it represents a big change. And anytime we see big changes in society, it's sometimes hard for society to process, because it requires changing existing habits. It may require existing businesses to dramatically be remapped. It may eliminate certain businesses. And so understandably, it's a challenging transition. We're going to see the exact same challenges with artificial intelligence, where it allows us to do things that we can't do today. but it's going to mean that certain jobs that used to exist won't exist, but it'll create new jobs. And so these are hard transitions. And so we are, as a company, we try to be really empathetic that this is not something that everyone's going to immediately jump on board with. And we want to create an environment where we can have open discussions, open dialogue, and people can feel comfortable asking questions, comfortable disagreeing, comfortable not yet being ready to make the leap, but still feel comfortable inside of a Rivian space or comfortable talking to somebody from Rivian.
Having, coming from both spaces, having owned both trucks, there is one that I do get friendly waves, and there is one that I do not get such friendly waves in. So I think we can do the math on that one. So we have someone here that says, Rivian has loaned me vehicles for my PBS series, America Outdoors, thank you. So how do you think about the storytelling needed to move us out of the fossil fuel era? Which also kind of talking about storytelling, you guys, like your content and stuff online, like you do such a great job of storytelling and creating kind of that excitement to see these Rivians out doing things. So like even something like that, the PBS show is like,
good for us, that's cool.
Let's hop in a Rivian.
Whoever we're doing that with, I'm glad we're doing it with you. Yeah, I mean, I talked about this idea of the fossil fuel era before, and it's, I actually think we don't fully, I think society sometimes doesn't fully appreciate just how we're running the planet today. When we talk about burning of fossil fuels, the fossil fuels that are stored in the crust of the earth today represent many hundreds of millions of years of mostly plant and to a much lesser degree animals living and then of course dying, carbon-based organisms, and being buried in the crust of the earth. And it's the time scales just are like mind-blowing that we've taken hundreds of millions of years of accumulated carbon and used that in 100 years. And what that means in terms of the longevity of this, it just doesn't work. So we could debate whether we have 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 more generations worth of fossil fuels to run the planet the way we live today. But if we were to do that, just to use every last bit of fossil fuels on the planet, we will put all that carbon that was pulled out of the atmosphere over many hundreds of millions of years back into the atmosphere. And we can then debate whether that's a 1.5 degree increase, a 5 degree increase, a 3 degree increase. The science community's got a very crisp view on what that is, but I think broader society is still debating that. But we have to make this change. And so I think the opportunity to build new businesses, new technologies, and to emerge as a country from a technical leadership point of view is such a motivator. And programs like what it sounds like you're working on with PBS are exactly what we need, because it presents the beauty and the awe of the outdoors. And again, I talked about common human traits before, so I talked about it in the context of kids. Another thing that we believe that's also true is whether you're pro-sustainability or anti-sustainability, if you take a walk through a redwood forest, if you are exploring through the Grand Canyons, if you're watching 5 or 6 deer walk and graze through a field, it moves you, and you recognize the beauty of this remarkably unique planet that we're on, and the remarkable level of biodiversity that exists in our planet. And it embeds you with a certain sense of responsibility that I don't want all that to go away for my kids or my kids' kids' kids. And so I think programs that create that exposure are really powerful. And then do it in a way that helps bring everybody along, and do it in a way that recognizes that this transition is not like we can snap our fingers and it's going to happen. It's going to take us many decades to change out our existing transportation infrastructure, this huge energy infrastructure we have. I mean, just to put this to scale, there's 2,400 coal power plants that have to be turned off just in the US alone. Wow. I mean, these are like many billion-dollar assets, so it's not, as much as I wish we could just have all that replaced with renewables tomorrow, there's a lot of changes that have to happen to turn off these coal and natural gas powered power plants. And that's changes to our energy policy, changes to businesses. But the more awareness we have that it needs to happen, it starts to drive action. And we heard a talk earlier today that spoke to some of these changes that are coming. And I think to to look out at the thousands and thousands of people that are working on building these new businesses, and to know that that's part of the solution is really exciting.
This is awesome. We're just about out of time. So is there anything else that you want to add before we let them all go?
No,
Other than get yourself a Rivian, I promise you will not be upset about it.
Well, first, thanks for joining this talk. We're excited to be a sponsor here. I think ultimately what South by Southwest represents and embodies is it's this beautiful combination of art and creativity with innovation, culture, brand, so many unique elements coming together, lots of diverse perspectives, and it really links to how we think about Rivian and the company and the brand that we're building. So, it's a pleasure to spend time with you, Justine, and thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you guys so much.